On the back of page 13, there's a template. This is the template I usually give to students. And I'm a little OCD, if you can't tell a little bit. I already have in my mind how much time we have for our discussion, and I like to break it into parts for students so that they can figure out, okay, in the first 10 minutes or so, I need to definitely have my opening question presented already, or first 5 minutes. So on the template, I would tell them, we're starting at 10 o'clock, we're gonna be finishing and wrapping up by 10:30. Make sure you get your first opening question out in the first 5 minutes, because otherwise it's not relevant to the conversation anymore. And then the last 10 minutes would be reserved for the ending question and whatever is left in the middle. So they get to gauge how much time they have to ask those questions that will contribute to their grade. All right? Gradual release would be a great way to present some information and then put it into practice, have participants reflect, and have a lesson that they could potentially take away so that within their first month of school, they would have a chance to practice something that we learned here today. We always want to give our students plenty of time to work with the text, interact with the partner, create those questions before we even have the discussion. Let's get ready to move on as we talk about just establishing some of those same principles as far as the classroom setup. How many of you have unlimited space in your room? You can move things.
Oh, me. My room is very,
I do actually have, I'm really comfortable in my room. I have lots of space to move things around. But if you are in a closet, as some of my peers are, you can't really set your room to this particular dimensions and width. So just use what you have. If you have a large class size of 40, which is what my room usually accommodates, I might have an inner and outer circle. So we're going to talk about the real classroom dynamics of setting this conversation space up, because everyone in the circle needs to be able to make eye contact. So here's a sample class arrangement, and you'll hear everyone talk about it differently. In the AVID world, we have inner circle, outer circle, we have hot seat, we have wingman, the terms are relevant. It's really about creating the space where students feel comfortable having the discussion. So in the first one, it's the typical large circle. Maybe you only have a class size of 25 and you can fit them in a large circle and it works out well. In 2 minutes while you guys were gone, I moved your desk and you came in and the space was ready. Over to the right, there's inner and outer circle, or also called fishbowl. So just imagine a seat right behind you, and that would be the outer circle. The outer circle, when we're having the discussion, could potentially use the person in front of them as their hot seat. So they could tap the person that's sitting in front and say, hey, I want to contribute, and they can switch seats momentarily and they can join in the conversation. But you don't want the outer circle speaking, just because they're not going to make eye contact. They're almost hiding behind someone, and someone's inevitably not going to see who's talking, and they're like, are they speaking without moving their mouth? You know, they have some silly conversation. The other one is triad. This one, it's usually referred to as the wingman. So there's one person in the circle and two people on their left and right. And they're feeding them information. They're feeding them topics. They're giving them points of clarification, asking them to direct a question maybe to a previous statement that was made. They can do all types of things using the Post-it notes or dry erase boards. Okay? And then the final one is simultaneous seminars. I aspire to get to this point. Not there yet. But it's a way of having multiple conversations going on in the room on different topics. So maybe I am working with a play in my English class. I may have Act 1, Act 2, Act 3, and Act 4 going on, and those questions are generated from that particular act, and kids have to do rotations. And they're rotating and having quick, short, sweet seminar discussions. And they're taking something away from the conversation where they're writing a one-sentence summary. That last portion of the takeaway from the conversation is critical. So and if you have a large group, how do you group students together? You may use different strategies, I just use the colored popsicle sticks, so when they come in the room, they're randomly getting a color, and then I may do a rainbow group or same color group, and that way, anytime you do need to split your groups, which I told you I'm aspiring to this multiple simultaneous groups, I feel like. But if you ever have to do that, that's one way of grouping students.
When you do the inner and outer circle, do you switch that up? I've seen you do it where you just kind of tap kids and send them in, but do you ever let them decide who gets in? How do you determine who's in the inner and outer circle?
If you're in the early part of the school year, my suggestion would be to assign an even and an odd number. So if on the roll sheet they're even, then they just are even for the rest of the year, let's say, or my cell phone pockets that I use or my computer lab cart, odd or even number, and then they have a number that they're already assigned in their room. So I would say even on the inner circle, outer would be odd. That's one suggestion I would make. So the second portion says during the seminar. So we're going to take all of that close reading to participate in the discussion that helps you understand the text at a deeper level and be ready to discuss the text like a scholar. And this has a lot to do with those social norms that we talked about, making eye contact, not raising your hand, things that we assume our students may know, but we really want to re-emphasize that you don't have to raise your hand during Socratic Seminar. You make eye contact with the speaker, and then when you're ready, you jump right into the conversation. Be prepared to participate and ask good questions, number one. Number two, show respect for differing ideas, thoughts, and values, no put-downs or sarcasm. Dealing with that sometimes has a lot to do with just student grades. Right now, we have a few people on the outer circle. I may encourage them to be my graders. I know they're quiet, or maybe I just know they're not really up to participating today. Something might be going on. It's okay sometimes to give them an out, but give them something that's meaningful so that they're still listening to the conversation. Maybe they're jotting down great ideas that they heard. Definitely during the debrief, their notes are invaluable. So that's a great way to make sure that the outer circle is still contributing to the conversation, maybe not during the seminar, but in the debrief. Mm-hmm. I heard Thomas say blah, 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 and they can recap some of the conversation for the rest of the group. Okay. Number three, allow each speaker enough time to begin and finish his or her thoughts. Don't interrupt. A lot of our students will jump in because they have a burning question. Give them a notepad or a piece of paper, something that they can just jot down their thought real quick, so that if someone is speaking and they think they may forget, they can just jot down a key word to help them remember, oh, that was a question I wanted to present. Okay. Involve others in the discussion and ask others to elaborate on their responses. Use academic language. But the academic language is, instead of saying that was a good point and then stop, they could say, Thomas, I agree with your elaboration on the author's claim. That's a much more academic language than just saying that was a good point. What was the good point? So being very specific and helping them with that language, no matter what level student you're working with. Okay. So choosing a seminar leader, starting with the question, I oftentimes will use a hot seat. So our hot seat is the bar stool. And if a student that's on the outer circle wanted to say something, in our case, if you're too far away and you just can't make it into the hot seat, you can tap the person in front of you and you can just exchange seats for a minute. But we're going to start off with our opening question. We're not going to use a student leader because we're all adults in the room. But if you were using a student leader, that person would just say, we're going to get ready with our discussion on the title of the text. We have about 30 minutes to facilitate this to hold this Socratic seminar. Please go ahead and get your materials ready for discussion. If the conversation goes stale and they need to redirect, they would have the same set of questions, STEM questions that other students are working with. The teacher really does have to sit and stay quiet. Socratic Seminar is not new. It's one of the best practices methods. It's been adopted by AVID, but it's not the only technique used by AVID, but it's one of the more popular ones, and it's been around a while. So I figured that some teachers may have exposed to it before, they may have practiced one or two strategies here and there, but actually understanding their background with Socratic Seminar would be helpful in me figuring out how much do I need to really elaborate on during the presentation. And what I learned was many of them had heard of the word Socratic Seminar. They have done bits and pieces of it, but they had never put it all together into something cohesive that they could really help their students work with a piece of text, complex text that we're challenging them with now, and have that discussion where they take the ownership off of themselves and put it onto their students. All right, so as the seminar leader, I'll go ahead and start. Today we are discussing schools' ban on fidget toys as classroom distractors by Kate there. We're going to go ahead and start with our opening questions, and we have about 25 minutes for our discussion today. Who would like to start?
I'll start. It's the first thing to start talking about in any article would be the title. So how could this be a better title for what they for what it's actually saying? Could there be a better title?
We asked the question, what is the text asking us to do? What is the purpose here? What is the end? Is it really meant to be objective, or is it giving two sides, or is it nudging more toward one direction or another?
I agree with that. One of the things that I mentioned earlier was that what kind of article is this? Is it telling you something happened? Is it a person expressing an opinion, or is it somebody collating a lot of different people's opinions?
I think some of the teachers were nervous when they walked back from break and they realized they were in a circle. But there's so much said about actually practicing it while you're learning. That hands-on opportunity to be engaged in a Socratic seminar, I think, is integral. They feel the pressure of what it's like to have that awkward silence. They know what it's like to contribute to a conversation. And listen to others as they're speaking about the topic, I think is the most important part of the time that we have together. You felt inclined to talk to me, right? And then I moved and I positioned myself behind her where she was going to have to break her neck to turn around and talk to me. And that's on purpose. As the teacher, students will oftentimes direct their comments to you, and really we want them to have a conversation with themselves. So under other circumstances, I may stand or I may find a seat behind a student in the outer circle, but I want to be inconspicuous. Did the conversation seem to have a lull? As a seminar leader, you may have your students say, well, how can you support that comment with evidence from the text? And that draws them back to the text, and it's no longer opinion-based. Can you support that from something from the paragraph, Jennifer? With your comment about the ban versus controversy. Let's move to our guiding questions. Does someone have a guiding question that they would like to get us started with?
I think in paragraph 25, it gives a really good, I feel like it's trying, the article or the author's trying to give an explanation, like where she says, the bump in popularity could relate to the greater inclusion of students with special needs. So the fact that there are special needs students that need them helps spread this as like just a fun toy trend for other people, that other students that just think they look fun.
One of the things that we noticed, or I noticed anyway, in the article was this assumption, or maybe even almost like a double standard, stay with me on this. So there's, at various points, we don't want them using it like it's a toy and it's a distraction, but we have games and we use toys, especially at younger ages, as tools for learning. So I didn't notice at some point in here how it is that people could be guided to use these as tools, how to make it an advantageous thing both for the student and for the teacher.
She alludes to the fact that the fidget spinners aren't being used correctly. So the school's first jump is to start taking them away from kids and banning them. And then if you look at paragraphs like 20 to 25, she's not direct with it, like you were pointing out that this is an article for you to make an opinion from. How we've included tools in paragraph 23. 24, paragraph 24, you can only spend so much time sitting and listening, and that's me. I've got like 5 minutes that I can sit still and not do anything and just listen. And she points that 25, the bump in popularity could relate to greater inclusion of students with special needs as well. And 27, students use fidgets as toys or collectibles, their benefits may diminish. So it is very much, you need to read this and figure out for yourself, but they're pointing out that these things are showing up everywhere, and it's kind of like an immediate reaction just to take them away because we don't know what to do with them, whereas maybe we should stop and consider of how we can use them with us versus against us.
Anything can be abused. I mean, I have kids with stress balls, and I can take them away because they're throwing them at people. So it's it, you know, they're throwing them up in the air like this. I said, no, it's a stress ball. Well, you can't take but you're not using it for anything but to throw at people. So even the stuff that we are given as actual tools, and they mess that up too. So.
I like the fact that you brought that up because at the same time, depending upon your environment, it can become a weapon.
It also is, because it's something trend, it's new, people will not associate you using it as a tool for relaxing, or they see, okay, he's a normal kid, so it doesn't label him as a disability or anything like that.
How can we be more proactive with that? You know, cell phones were bad in classrooms. They're always distracting. Well, if you use Kahoot or Quizlet, it's a way to include students with things. Although it's beyond me whether this is going to be a fad or not. But if it does stay, maybe we should come up with a way to use it. Years ago, I used on the projector a wheel, and everybody had like a different number, of color, and if it landed on that number, well, then it was your turn. You know, it was just a way to try to use something to get students to focus.
I'd like to call attention to our time. We are almost at the last 10 minutes, so if you would, move to your closing question. And here's the part where I would encourage those that didn't have a chance to speak to jump into the conversation and make sure that they contribute to the closing question or answer to a closing question. Want to get us started?
How does this idea connect to you as a student in the classroom setting? When we looked at this, we looked at other students that may not have the fidget spinner, as someone spoke of earlier. Does it distract them? What is their take on it?
We kind of touched on it, but with the comments that you made, but trying to predict and justify the future developments, I thought was a fitting question for where the next steps are with fidget spinners. Can we predict where it may end up? I talked about this with my teammate, like, do we foresee all schools banning it or some schools banning it, or there being inclusions in IEPs and 504s, what the future outcome could be, and that goes back to some of the discussion over here was we really need to take a deeper look into what fidget spinners can contribute.
What about the possibility of helping some of us who might be annoyed by the sound of it find strategies so that we don't get as annoyed as quickly, so that, I mean, that's about coping with stress and unwanted whatevers, which we've got to, that's something we all have to learn as well.
You bring up this point, I would say we've come to a close of our Socratic Seminar. However, there are many of you that did not have an opportunity to speak. So we'd like to do, I call it different things, hot potato, which is a quick chance for you to say anything that you didn't get a chance to say, and just kind of put it out there for the group, not necessarily waiting for a response. It could be a comment, it could be a thought, it could be a question, and if you don't have anything to contribute, you can just say pass. So you just go around the whole circle, 1, 2, 3, 30 seconds, say what you want to say.
That we need to be working with our students to get them to develop coping skills beyond the immediate, and teaching them appropriate use of different things. You know, I think we're really falling down if we're not teaching them when it's okay to be looking at your cell phone and when you really need to put it away, and when you can spin and not spin, or, you know, those kinds of things, or what could you do instead of that? You know, what are coping skills that other people have used over the years?
I would use the same tactic that I had 2 students once that always sat together. They always ran their mouth. And I tried to separate them. They said, well, how come? Okay, let's look at it this way. You can sit together, but the day you do not finish every last thing that I give you to do, you're separated. And they did their work. So I said, listen, you do that thing, but the instant I see that you walk around and see you with anything not finished, I'm taking it. I think you'd be surprised that they'll actually work to make sure they get it. So.
All right, so that concludes our Socratic Seminar. I would have students do a seminar summary using the template. And for interest of time today, we're just going to really kind of talk through it. In the text blank, you would fill in with the title and author. Claims blank. What do we decide? What is the author's claim? Not necessarily a solid claim. So in the text, the author attempts to provide
conflicting viewpoints on fidget spinners as a distraction in the classroom.
Okay. The author states that. Could be one piece of detail. What does the author state?
Many schools are banning.
Schools are banning fidget spinners,
Even though other experts say they are valued.
even though other experts say they're of value. We can change that to a complex sentence. Then he or she closes with, I think you brought it up that there was a source, a valid source. Or someone was talking about the validity of one of the sources in the end.
That was the lady.
Then the author, through the expert opinion of the occupational therapy professors, that the spinners aren't being used to their benefit, because they're
Right.
not being taught how to use them appropriately.
Perfect. This is significant because, what would we say?
It's something that everybody's had experience with, or will have experience with.
Everyone has or will have experience with, okay? So let's think back to our essential question. So look back at your Cornell notes. Based on the essential question, were all students engaged? If you were representing students.
No.
No.
Not everyone was engaged fully, but we could find ways to engage everyone. That last round where everyone went around, you could say there's no pass. You have to contribute. And so that takes away I'm just gonna stay quiet, you know. You take away the pass and then they have to give at least 2 cents to the conversation. Sometimes our students are active listeners and that we wanna reward them if they can at least complete the summary. We know that they were listening, because you would do that independently as opposed to what we did, which was out loud. You could have them write it out as their response to the Socratic Seminar. We didn't have too many yes or no answers in our discussion. Everyone elaborated really and explained their point. The second part of our essential question, if you could look over your shoulder, dialogue used in collaboration and deep reading strategies. Was there collaboration? Not necessarily during the seminar, but
A little bit.
prior in preparation for the seminar. There was collaboration. Some of you mentioned the conversation that you had with your shoulder partner. You said, while we were discussing, this came up. And that allows for students to get all of those ideas out, even though it may not have been part of the whole conversation. It was part of their shoulder conversation, okay? And the reading strategy that we used? Marking the text. There's a troubleshooting guide on page 15 and 16. Talks about how you can have all 35 of your students participating, the difference between Socratic Seminar and the typical teacher-directed classroom discussion. I'm so winded because I did so much work just now. What was my part? Other than seminar leader, I really just stepped out of the conversation. As a teacher, you want to do that. It was really hard. I wanted to go to the hot seat, but I said, no, stay back. All right, number 3, what kind of classroom environment is needed for Socratic Seminar to flourish? And 4, some students want to dominate the conversation. Those are some tips on steering them clear of dominating the conversation. So if you would, turn to page 3 again. This is after the seminar. This is why you want to save some time, that debrief and assess. After the seminar is complete, looking at numbers 1, 2, or 3. So if you would, take a couple minutes, read through 1, 2, and 3, and mark the text, and we'll have a discussion about what would you use, what feels most comfortable in your setting in the classroom after the seminar is complete. What do you envision now that you've had a chance to see the steps? Do you have a lesson in mind, the text that you would be using? We have 90-minute classes, so my students are antsy after 45 minutes, so I need to transition. So for me, 35 minutes, 40 minutes in a discussion is ideal. If you're coming in and you're on a regular schedule, 45 minutes is close. They need to come in, the room should already be set, or it takes them 2 minutes to set it up. Maybe the first time you just practice getting set up, turning desk. That's a challenge in itself.
Yeah.
You know, marking it with tape and saying desks need to be on this line in some way, shape, or form might help. But using every minute that you have, 10 minutes just setting up, and then the last portion of the class period actually having your discussion. Sometimes you do cut that conversation off, and it's great to have students walking out of your door talking about your class. But the debrief for me is not the same the next day. When I send them home to debrief and do it independently, it's just not the same. We don't get the feedback, you don't get the spontaneous response to that moment when you wait till the next day.
I think when we get into the FSA writing, I'm going to use this strategy with our FSA materials and see what I can use with those materials and use the Socratic Seminar before they write their FSA papers.
I think it'd be great for you discussing text, specifically books or short stories that we do for literary discussions. I think it'll really help the students with that, so I'm excited. Seeing that, determining theme, determining author's point of view, how the characters drive the plot, all of those little standards, I think it'll really help the students.
I think it's very important for the 11th and 12th grade students, being that they have to pass FSA or ACT or SAT, looking at the text and using the text that they are unfamiliar with and the ones that they are not actually engaged in using, to use this as a vehicle to get them interested and engaged.